Week 9 college football picks presented by Papa John's. I'm Chris Hassel. Brady Quinn is here. Danny Kannell will join us as well. We're going to pick every top 25 game against the spread. Final week before the very first college football playoff rankings are unveiled. We have 6 remaining unbeatens. A couple of them are going to match up next week, assuming they can take care of business this week. Tennessee hosting Kentucky, and in our SEC game of the week, number 1 Georgia faces Florida.
The last Saturday in October always means one thing in Jacksonville: Florida, Georgia. Along the banks of the St. Johns River, both fan bases convene for one of the most intense battles in all of college football. Led by Mark Richt, the Dogs reignited the rivalry in 2007. That's the whole team!
The whole team is on the field right now.
Then Urban Meyer's Gators snapped back 1 year later. In 2010, a rare instance of a coach taunting a player with the player prevailing. 2 years later, a fumble was forced and tears were shed. Fast forward a decade, and both programs are in much different spots. Georgia, fresh off its first national championship in 41 years, looking for another.
You look at what you've done well, what you've done poorly, and how can we do it better? And we sit down as coaches and say, all right, what do we need to do to win the next 5 games, 6 games, and we target that area.
Florida is on its 5th head coach in 12 years, searching for stability and success. And Billy Napier is fully aware of the opportunity that lies ahead.
Defending national champs and the number 1 team in the country presents a great opportunity, and certainly we look forward to it.
These two programs hate each other so much, they can't even agree on how many times they've played. But one thing is for certain: the stadium in Jacksonville will be split down the middle, with red and black on one side and orange and blue on the other. And this gathering won't be friendly. It's a rivalry that represents what we love about college football, and we've got a front row seat on CBS.
All right, we're going to get a pick for that game, and our guys are hot. Another winning week for Brady Quinn and Danny Kannell. Brady is 14 games over 500 for the season. Danny, 8 games over 500, and over 500 on their best bets as well. Good to see that. Let's continue to ride the wave of momentum. Chris Hassel joined by Brady Quinn. Danny Kannell joining us remotely today because of traffic situation in the South Florida area.
Yeah, tanker on
I-95 backed up.
It's crazy. I-95 is probably the toughest defense to getting to the studio that there is.
It's unbeaten.
Yeah,
it's
even better than the Georgia defense.
Hey, the Georgia defense going up against Anthony Richardson in Florida, and if the Gators have a chance in this game, Richardson needs to play like maybe a number 1 overall pick.
He does, and this is a great opportunity, I think, for him to really showcase what he's capable of, because he is draft eligible. But boy, he's been inconsistent this year. I mean, bottom line is you see it flashes at times of his capabilities, but it just hasn't been often enough. And honestly, the Florida defense has been one of the worst in the SEC, as inconsistent as it gets. I think that's the challenge for this one is Georgia's building towards something, trying to repeat, to have their 2nd national championship, but also preparing for what lies ahead, a big matchup versus the Tennessee Volunteers just a week away. So this one, to me, it's a big line. I mean, 22.5 points, and you're talking about a rivalry game on a neutral site. Here's my advice, though. You lay those points, okay? This is not a trap game. This is not something that Georgia's going to overlook. They're building towards something. Now, and Kendall Milton, their 2nd leading rusher, may be back for this one. He's been out with an injury, but they've had extra time to recover and prepare. So, Danny, I don't know how you feel about this one. It's a big line. I'm willing to lay these points. Georgia looks clearly the better team to me right now.
I am in lockstep with you on the pick. I'm on the other side on the total because I think their defense is going to shut down the Florida Gators' offensive attack. I mean, I totally agree. So Georgia's a team that was a little bit hard to figure out. They had this little kind of stretch when Kent State, I think it was, where they kind of struggled with them. Then they went to Missouri, had them on the ropes. Late in the 4th quarter, they dodged that disaster there in Columbia. But then they put their pedal to the metal, and it's been back to their dominant ways, and they look more like the team that beat Oregon 49-3 at the start of the season. And boy, that win is starting to look a lot better as the season goes on, and Oregon keeps improving too and showcasing that really was an impressive win. The bye week helps. You mentioned Kendall Milton, the other guys getting healthy. I think the offense is going to try to fine-tune things. They're going to get healthier too. And Florida's just, it's a rebuild year for the Florida Gators. I do think they'll get their best effort. That's why I'm kind of anticipating maybe some defensive stops early in the game when they sell out, and they're going to have, the emotions out there, and they'll play to their best. But ultimately, Georgia's just too talented. I think they pull away in the second half. I think they win by probably 24. But I don't see it being a higher scoring affair, so I'll lean towards the under. But I like the Georgia Bulldogs too, even though it's such a big number.
3:30 Eastern time on CBS, our SEC game of the week. Another good SEC matchup. It's a top 20 matchup, and the first time it's a ranked matchup since 1951. Kentucky going to Tennessee. You're not getting as many points for the underdog here, but you're still getting double digits.
Still getting double digits, but boy, this Tennessee team has really come along. And so, look, at times Kentucky has as well. I think when you look at their season as a whole, there's definitely some concerns. In fact, one of their losses came when Will Levis wasn't even starting quarterback. He'll be back for this one. He should be licking his chops for Kentucky. He may have one of his best wide receivers coming back at Davion Robinson. But this is a defense for Tennessee that's given up a lot of yards. However, that being said, they're getting a lot of pressure. And Kentucky has had a hard time protecting Will Levis. The only flip side to this is since Chris Rodriguez is back, he's been the bell cow back for Kentucky. So you better believe they're going to try to test that stingy defense of UT up front that's been good against stop the run. This was a tough one for me, Danny. I don't know how you felt about this. It's a big number again for what kind of is a rivalry game, at least in my opinion. I'm willing to lay the points, though. I'll lay the 12.5. Tennessee's not necessarily coming off a bye like Kentucky is, but you could make the case based on how they played UT Martin last week. So I think they're going to be rearing ready to go. Tough place to go win a ball game. I'm laying the points here with Tennessee.
I'm with you again. A couple favorites early on, making me a little bit nervous. We'll have to find some dogs in here somewhere. But I think this Tennessee team, they're not a team that's going to overlook anybody on their schedule. This is new territory for them to be inside the top 5, to be talked about on the national stage week in and week out. And I thought they handled their business really impressively last week against UT Martin. That was the trap game. That was, a hangover game where they could come out lethargic. They were up 52-7 at halftime. And I know it's an FCS opponent, but they could have come out sluggish. They did not. I think this is a team that's fine-tuned. They're looking at accomplishing something special, having a historical season. Already their start matches what they did back in 1998. It's that type of year, and I think it'll be too overwhelming. There's a portion of me that's nervous, though, about Kentucky's defense, what they did to Mississippi State and Will Rogers, keeping them in check. I think Hendon Hooker could get beat up a little bit in this game, but there's too much firepower. And speaking of getting guys back, I think as the season goes along and you get guys like Cedric Tillman to come back, you get the defense fully healthy, or off of potential, disciplinary issues with a guy like Jalen McCullough, this Tennessee team is only going to continue to get better. And I think playing in Knoxville is going to help them. And I'm not bought into the Will Levis, is this top 5 pick just yet. This will be an opportunity for him against the defense, which is gettable. So I think he does get some points in the second half, which is why I lean towards the over as well. But ultimately, this Tennessee offense has too much firepower, so I'll say they cover too.
I think if this one wasn't at home, maybe you'd be a little bit concerned too, considering what's on the back end of this game. But Tennessee has to be zeroed in. I mean, Danny mentioned it. Obviously, Kentucky's been able to go on the road and find some ways of upsetting some folks. This is one, though, where I think Tennessee takes care of business.
Ahead of the Tennessee trip to Athens, Georgia next week. No Alabama and LSU this week. Those teams with their traditional buys ahead of their matchup next week, a big one in the SEC West. Ole Miss is right there in contention for a division championship as well, but they stumbled last week. Speaking of stumbling, Texas A&M continues to do that. They've lost 3 straight. Brady, they haven't lost 4 straight since 2005.
No, you've got a quarterback situation, too, between Haynes King and the freshman Casey Wigman, and not really sure which way Jimbo Fisher's going to go. Maybe they both play at some point in time like they did their last game. Also, the problem is you got a number of kids who reportedly got in trouble, right now, kicked off the team for some of the things they've done. That's never a good sign, too, for Jimbo Fisher and the type of culture he's trying to continue to create and build there at Texas A&M. Some talented players from that 2022 recruiting class. All that being said, College Station's a tough place to go win a football game. This is still a solid defensive team, even with the offensive struggles for Texas A&M. And I don't know what the heck to make of Ole Miss after going up 17-3 last week versus LSU and being outscored 42-3 by LSU. And I know LSU is starting to get some things going on right now, but Ole Miss just absolutely couldn't find anything in the second half of that game. I think those struggles are going to continue here, too, in College Station. So I'll take the 2.5 points here. I just can't see Jimbo Fisher with all that talent going on a 4-game skid, Danny.
So I think calling Texas A&M a dumpster fire is an insult to dumpster fires. I think it's worse than that. I do. There's something off and majorly off. I mean, quarterback issues are one thing, which they do, which is a dilemma. They had already lost their best player in Anais Smith earlier this season. Now they've got 3 offensive linemen shelved for the season, and you've got this issue, the disciplinary issue happening with 3 or maybe 4 true freshmen on the team. You mentioned College Station being a tough place to play. I think it's going to be tough for the Aggies to play because fans are going to come out there and let them hear about it if they're not, in this game, if they're losing this game, which I do think you'll see a potential there. I do think LSU is maybe further along than we thought in Brian Kelly's first year. I mean, they put together a couple games back-to-back, going to Gainesville, getting a nice win this past weekend, beating an Ole Miss team, which was 7th. And I don't think anybody thought Ole Miss was really the 7th best team in the country, but that's still a pretty good LSU team that beat them down. And Lane Kiffin talked about not having time to hang their heads. I think they'll show up. I think they'll be ready to play with a lot more to play for as far as bowls, better bowl situations, still staying in the hunt in the SEC West race. So I'll take the Rebels here on the road. I think they got at least some momentum, and Texas A&M has 0. Or I should take that back. They have momentum going in the wrong direction, and I don't know how they reverse it.
Yeah, might not even make a bowl game this season in College Station. One more SEC-ranked team in action. That's number 25, South Carolina. They've won 4 straight games, but they're only 5-point favorites at home. I thought this line was a little bit fishy.
This one's a little fishy to me, too. I mean, I recall early in the season, remember Shane Beamer after 2 games, they got blown out by Georgia, and he's asked if the team's given up on him. He's like, what? No, of course not. I mean, look, they've been able to come along, and it's really been their defense that's led the way, not offensively. Spencer Rattler's still been inconsistent as a passer. Marshawn Lloyd's done a good job out of the backfield. This is one, though, where, to me, something just feels off about this line. So I'm going to take the 5 points and Mizzou. These 2 teams are pretty evenly matched, so I'm surprised the number is what it is at this point. But I'll take the 5 points in Mizzou here, Danny.
Yeah, I can hear Shane Beamer. Come on, Phil. What kind of question is that? When he got a little bit irritated. But you know what? His team has responded. Here's the thing. That 25 in front of South Carolina is fraudulent. They are not a top 25 team in the country. I'm with you. There's something stinky about this. This is one of those ones similar to Ole Miss. We're like, I don't think that's the 7th-ranked team, and that's why they were a dog here. But this one is too many points for me. I think this is an even matchup on the field. I think it'll probably come down to a field goal. If I can get over that number, I'll go ahead and take it. So I'll take Eli Drinkwitz. I think this team is still competing. They dodged disaster. It was one of my upset picks last week that didn't hit the outright money line win for Vanderbilt getting their first conference win. But I'll go ahead and take Mizzou here. They're still fighting. I think they see this as a winnable game for themselves. So I'll go ahead and take Mizzou.
Their defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, has done a tremendous job with Mizzou's defense. Situation in particular. One of the better third down red zone teams. That's where they kind of have made their hay today. This season. But, Mizzou can hang around in this one. There's no doubt.
I wonder how much different that season would feel if they were able to hang on to that game against Georgia, a game they had and let it slip away. Recapping the SEC picks against the spread from Brady and Danny after another winning week for both of them last week. And they're on 3 of the 4 teams here. They like Georgia minus 22.5 against Florida. They're laying the points with Tennessee as a home favorite at night against Kentucky as well. And then going with the underdog, Missouri, plus 5 on the road at South Carolina. They differ on A&M Ole Miss. Up next, we head to the Big Ten. And number 2, Ohio State going to number 13, Penn State. It'll be a great environment. Toughest test of the season so far for the Buckeyes. HQ, presented by Papa John's. We're picking Big Ten games, ranked teams against the spread. A couple of them play each other this week. Ohio State is at Penn State in Happy Valley. That's a big noon game. Brady Quinn will be there. Nebraska is a home dog, a touchdown dog to Illinois. The Fighting Illini right now with a chance to win the Big Ten West and a chance better than most. They are the favorites right now. Michigan looking for revenge against Michigan State. Spartans beat them last year. All right, let's pick them. Starting with the game that Brady is going to be at. Big test for Ohio State. I'm going to stop short of that. I'm going to say biggest test so far for Ohio State. Is it going to be a legit test, though?
I think it will be. I mean, look, this is a challenging place to go play. Some people will say it's the most challenging, considering 100,000 plus in there. Granted, it's not going to be a whiteout, but you're all going to get a lot of noise.
Why not? Why didn't they do the whiteout for this one?
They did it the previous week versus Minnesota. It's how scheduling works. It's how it works. You know, I can't give you all the answers for this.
I mean, Minnesota, you don't need it against Minnesota. You need it against Ohio State.
Some would say you want to build momentum into that.
Okay.
And after they gave up over 400 yards rushing to the Michigan Wolverines, it was nice to see them be able to take care of Mohamed Ibrahim, who was held to his lowest total of the season, and they held Minnesota only 3.5 yards per attempt. So that was much of an improvement for the Penn State defense that needed to find itself. Maybe needed that whiteout a little bit. Here's what I like about this matchup, though. I think the secondary for Penn State can match up versus the wide receivers for Ohio State. Not many teams in the Big Ten, or let alone in the country, can say that.
Big State.
And Manny Diaz likes to bring a lot of pressure. You go back and look at last week. Yeah, it looks like a blowout. C.J. Stroud struggled in that first half, in part because Iowa got a few hits on him early. Not the same player if you can get pressure and get some hits on him early, move him off the spot. I think Penn State has the ability to do that. It's about whether or not they can execute it. The only other wild card to all this, too, is Mike Yurcich, the offensive coordinator for Penn State. He crossed over with Jim Knowles at Oklahoma State for just 1 year back in 2018. So you better believe both the Penn State offense going up against that Ohio State defense, there'll be some cat and mouse games going on. They understand each other's schemes, the weaknesses to that. I think that helps Penn State keep this one close at home. So I'll take the points of Penn State. Ohio State wins, but I think this one's going to be close.
All right, before I give my pick, I must say I side with Hassel. Like, why not do the whiteout here? Why not do it multiple games? Like, what's wrong with doing it twice? But why not get everybody excited? Make the loudest atmosphere you can. Why not do it at noon and only do it at night? I'm with Hassel. Like, why not increase the enthusiasm?
Sounds like Penn State's already lost the game.
It will be divided in blue and white. It'll be one of those games.
Yeah,
I forget
a
little
stripe show?
Yeah.
A little stripe show, okay.
Yeah.
A little stripe out.
Stripe out.
So as far as the pick goes, I'm with you, Brady. I do think Penn State can keep it within this number. I think this is a better matchup for Penn State than when they played Michigan, where they gave up all those rushing yards. Michigan, they couldn't match Michigan's physicality. But from what we've seen of Ohio State, they can be physical, but they want to stretch the field vertically and get those big pass plays. They can run it. I think they're going to be tested to try to run it against Penn State's defense. But I'm with you. I do think they'll have more success there. And I think Ohio State's defense is going to get tested with the run game of Penn State. This will probably be one of their bigger challenges to stop the run that they've seen this season. And you're right, there were 3 consecutive drives for Ohio State where they had to settle for field goals, which felt like a massive victory for Iowa at the time. And yet still, even in a game that felt off, Ohio State still put up 54 points. But Penn State, deeper, more athletic than Iowa, I do think they'll be able to hang around long enough to keep it in this number. I don't want to say upset alert, but I saw the same things and seen them over the course of history with C.J. Stroud. If they can create pressure with some blitzes and pressures on the road, keep that crowd in the game, I don't think an upset is that crazy in this college football season where we've seen crazy things happen already. But if I'm getting 14.5, 15.5 points, I'll go ahead and take them.
Danny, going out on a limb saying the Penn State offense is a little bit better than Iowa's, the one Ohio State saw last week.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Especially when your defense outscores your offense. That's a problem.
Unbelievable. 54-10 last week was the final, by the way. Michigan and Michigan State. Now, this is a big number. 22 points here. And Michigan remembers last season.
Oh, yeah.
The one loss they had in the regular season.
You better believe they do. They're in East Lansing. I was there to witness that. And it was a bit surprising. I think it shocked Michigan. There was a controversial call there, too. I think it was a sack. Maybe it was down in the sack fumble and all that in the end zone. But I digress. Michigan's on the warpath right now to get back to the Big Ten championship game and kind of showcase their dominance, not only just over the little brother in Michigan State, but also Ohio State. And you go back and look at their rushing attack a couple weeks ago versus Penn State, absolutely dominant. Going into that game, Penn State hadn't given up 400 yards combined all year, let alone give over 400 yards just in one game to the Michigan running backs. So a dominant performance. I think this is one of those games you look at and go, just a bad matchup. Michigan State's the 4th worst rush defense in the Big Ten. They're 2nd worst against the pass. Defensively, Mel Tucker has not been able to get this group going. And offensively, they're not what they were last year without Kenneth Walker. It looks like he may be the offensive rookie of the year. So I think this is a game where Michigan makes a statement at home versus Michigan State. I'm laying those points here, Danny.
I looked at the Michigan State team. Michigan State's a hard team to figure out, right? It's been way below the standards. They just paid Mel Tucker $95 million, and you come out, it's like, what happened? Then they get a win against Wisconsin after Wisconsin had beat Northwestern 42-7. And you're like, what are you going to get? I think you have 2 teams that have really separated themselves in Ohio State and Michigan, and I don't think many teams are on their level, including Michigan State. So I'm on the same side of you as this one. I think Michigan wins. I think they win big. I don't know if Jim Harbaugh pays attention to the polls with them being fourth and they want to move up potentially. I don't think it matters that much. But there have been some criticisms and valid criticisms of their schedule, which is extremely light, especially that non-conference, which started off with the weakest slate of maybe anybody in the country. So much so that if they're in a situation where they're potentially a one-loss team, they need style points. And I think they get some style points here against a Big Ten conference opponent, against a rival, against a brand that still resonates if it's a big win, and I think they do get it. So I'll lay the 22 as well. I'd like to see them open it up a little bit more with J.J. McCarthy, but if they don't have to and Blake Corum still makes this unlikely run potentially to a Heisman Trophy candidate, why push that? But I do think at some point I'd like to see a little bit more out of J.J. McCarthy. Let him throw it, because when you do have that matchup with Ohio State, you might need some more explosive firepower. So maybe we see them work on that a little bit too. Either way, I'm laying the points.
To Danny's point, that was something that, sitting around Michigan for about a month, you kept thinking you're going to see more go routes, more deep posts, something that would stretch the field, even versus Indiana, which is one of the worst defenses in the Big Ten in regards to pass defense. And the stats looked good at the end of the game, but there just weren't really those plus 20, plus 30 shots downfield that I think you're going to have to eventually make in order to beat Ohio State, or once you get into the college football playoff, be able to compete with some of those teams. So to Danny's point, I'd love to see it. I don't know if maybe the coaching staff or Jim Harbaugh is hesitant to put J.J. McCarthy in that position right now.
They looked great in the second half against Penn State a few weeks ago, and we're still trying to figure out who's that next team after Ohio State and Michigan. Penn State is going to try to prove that they're that next team this week. Team over there in Illinois, in Champaign, Illinois, is saying, hey, look at us. We're the favorites now in the Big Ten West. I get it. It's not a great division. Only one loss this season for Brett Bielema's team, and they're 7.5-point favorites at Nebraska.
And rightfully so. I mean, look, this team can run the rock. Chase Brown is the best running back, arguably, statistically speaking, in Power 5. He's been special this year. Tommy DeVito, the transfer quarterback, has stepped up when called upon. Isaiah Williams is a playmaker on the outside. And this defense is stingy for Illinois. So there's no doubt they should be favored in this one, though. But something tells me Nebraska is going to be able to hang around. Casey Thompson can allow things to be competitive at times in games. I'm not saying by any means Nebraska can pull off the upset at home, but these guys are playing with a bit of pride. I do think they'll be able to hang around in this one because of some of their big playability. Guys like Trey Palmer, who can stretch the field vertically and be able to challenge that Illinois defense. But bottom line is, it's just a bad matchup. I mean, Illinois, we talk about Chase Brown. Nebraska gave up 217 yards to Purdue. Purdue doesn't even try to run the football, let alone giving that much production up to them. So Illinois wins this one. I'm going to take the 7.5 points, though. The hook's kind of getting me here. So I think Nebraska can keep it close.
I'm with you. Like, who do you trust in the Big Ten West? I guess it's Illinois. At some point, you have to start saying maybe they're a good football team, but they don't win impressively. That's for sure. And to ask them to do it on a road show here in Lincoln, where it's going to be yet another sellout for that sea of red, I think Nebraska, they've been still fighting here with the interim coach, Mickey Joseph, fighting for that opportunity. They're still kind of clawing their way. I still have, the nightmare fuel that was the Iowa-Illinois game, that 9-6 just masterpiece that was put on display by those two teams. I don't know if Illinois is going to be able to put up, any kind of offense where they just blow out an opponent. And even I would say in this division, a blowout would be considered 10 points. I think it'll be a touchdown or less, so I'm with you. I'll go ahead and take Nebraska in the 7.5.
One thing about Illinois, too, is that their defense is ranked, I believe, the #1 pass defense in the Big Ten. The interesting thing about that is if you look at their schedule, the best pass offense they've faced is Indiana this whole season. They're ranked 44th nationally. So I do think Nebraska will be able to test them a little bit, too, down the field.
Yeah, you don't see many great passing attacks in the Big Ten West unless you face Purdue, or this week, maybe Nebraska. All right, we're going to pick Iowa Northwestern now, and the total is, you're just kidding. We're not going to pick that one. 31.5 the total for
under.
that.
Pick the under.
It is,
Pick the under.
That's going to be a record if it stays that way, by the way. A lot of agreement. Look at this. Wow. Both guys on Penn State. Both guys on Michigan. Both guys on Nebraska, and it's locked unity there for Michigan and the over 54.5 against Sparty. All right, let's take a look at the Big 12 and the AAC. We're going to kind of put these two conferences together because there's only a handful of ranked games between them. TCU is the unbeaten team in the Big 12. They're at West Virginia, a West Virginia team that's owned them lately. Oklahoma State is at a banged-up Kansas State team, and in the AAC, only one ranked team in action. It's Cincinnati at the Bounce House. Tulane is number 23 in the country, but they are idle this week. Tulane and Cincinnati will play last game of the regular season. All right, Brady Quinn and Danny Kannell are going to pick these games against the spread. Let's start with Oklahoma State going to Kansas State, and the Wildcats coming off their first Big 12 loss of the season, and they lost more than just the game, too.
Banged up. I mean, running back Deuce Vaughn left that game injured. He's been a big piece, obviously, of their offense. Adrian Martinez left that game banged up. Will Howard comes in. He eventually leaves. Freshman quarterback Jeff Rubley goes in. So clearly there's some concern on the part of Kansas State. And who's going to start at quarterback if your best player and Deuce Vaughn's going to be back there in the backfield for you? But Danny, I don't know how you feel about this line. Something is off to me. I mean, Kansas State given a 1.5. I kind of thought Oklahoma State will be favored. They're the higher-ranked team. I know they're on the road here, but to me, I mean, they've been the more consistent team. I think it's 2 weeks in a row now. In Stillwater last week, Texas was the favorite, given 6 points. So I don't know if it's disrespect or if someone knows something and they're just waiting for this Oklahoma State team to stumble in Manhattan. Looks fishy to me. Call me a fish. I'll go ahead and take the hook here. Crazy things happen in Manhattan. The Big 12 has been a conference where I think we've seen some of this upset, a lot of parity throughout the course of it. And, you know, Spencer Sanders is coming off, I would say, like a monster upset over Texas. One of his best performances, you'd say, maybe in his career at Oklahoma State. But that Oklahoma State defense is starting to give up a lot of yards, some big plays. I think there's some plays to be made for Kansas State in this one. So call me a fish. I'm taking that line. I'm taking the 1.5. I'm going to lay the 1.5 here and be with Kansas State, Danny.
I think this is a game that's really a battle of attrition between both teams. I mean, there's a lot of focus because a couple stars potentially could be out for Kansas State. We saw them down to their third quarterback, or else they would have beaten TCU. I mean, TCU, I don't want to take away from what they've done from this season. We'll talk about them in a minute. But they probably would have lost that game if Adrian Martinez or another quarterback is able to finish that game, and it just got kind of sideways for them. I think Oklahoma State has been through this gauntlet as well. Baylor, Texas Tech, TCU, Texas, where they're just as banged up. There were a lot of question marks about Spencer Sanders. What was his status for the game against Texas? And he played and he looked fine during that game. But I think they're pretty banged up too. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing you are. I'm laying the 1.5. Chris Klieman's done a fantastic job there at Kansas State, a program that never really gets the respect they deserve. Plus, I think there's a ton of parity in the Big 12, which is a compliment. I don't know if they have a playoff-worthy team, but they've got a bunch of really good football teams. And if you're getting me a home field, I'll go ahead and take the home field here and lay the 1.5.
To get a playoff team, TCU might have to run the table. They beat Kansas State last week in comeback fashion. Tricky spot here, going to West Virginia. Max Duggan has been terrible against West Virginia in his career. 0-3, just 1 touchdown pass to 5 interceptions.
He's been phenomenal this year, though. He's been the best quarterback in the Big 12. 19 touchdown passes to only 1 interception. Quinn Johnston's been the big play receiver, in particular the last 3 weeks, over 150 yards per game, a touchdown each one of those matchups. We talked about a moment ago, Kendra Miller, and the balance they have on offense with that rushing attack. And the defense has been pretty good, too. So it lends you to think that, hey, why not lay the points there in Morgantown? History tells us something else, too. I think Danny's going to tell you something else here, too, because after a big win last week versus Kansas State, Danny, what is this game for TCU? Tell me, babe, what is this?
Hangover game. Big time.
So being that that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and take the 7.5 points. I don't think West Virginia pulls off the upset. I do think they're able to keep this close.
I'm with you. Morgantown's a tough place to play. I mean, they're a tough team to figure out. Maybe they were hungover from the win against Baylor, and Neil Brown felt like it was the signature win he needed to potentially save his job, and then they have an ugly loss against Texas Tech. Here's the thing. I think I told you guys on here at some point a couple weeks ago that I wouldn't lay more than a touchdown with any team in the Big 12. It kind of goes back to the depth of the conference. In West Virginia, they're almost in last. They're not in last place in the conference, but they're still – the gap between them and TCU isn't that significant where you trust TCU to go on the road. And again, it felt like they should have lost the game against Kansas State this past weekend. Max Duggan continues to he's banged up and battered too. This is a tough spot for them. It's going to be a ruckus crowd. I think the crowd noise gets them. I think this is maybe a trendy spot where you could say West Virginia could get the win outright. I don't know if I'm going to get that bold right here, but I'll go ahead and take the 7.5 all day long.
Yeah, to your point, Danny, Iowa State's in last place. They're 0-4, all 4 losses by a touchdown or fewer this season. Let's move to a couple teams who are going to be in the Big 12 next season in the AAC right now. Cincinnati, UCF, close to a pick'em here. Cincinnati right now, if you're going by the AP poll anyway, has the best shot to get to a New Year's 6 game out of the group of 5.
Yeah, look, I think when you match up these two teams, they're pretty evenly matched. I mean, they're two of the tops in the AAC, the way they look at least statistically speaking. But John Rice Plumlee, to me, has been one of the best players in college football. We probably don't give enough credit to and talk about him. He's a legitimate threat running the football. This passing game has improved since his time at Ole Miss, where Lane Kiffin basically was able to move on from him for not being able to throw the football more effectively. And if you look at Cincinnati last week, had complete control over SMU. They allowed them to sneak in to cover that game and make it really close in the end in the back door, even after Tanner Mordecai was knocked out of that game. So bottom line here is I'll go ahead and take the point here in UCF, but I think they win this one outright.
I'm with you on this one, too. Same side. John Rice Plumlee, I had their game against FAU, and I talked to Gus Malzahn, and he felt like he was really close to Nick Marshall. You remember the success they had at Auburn with Nick Marshall, went to an SEC title, and except he's a better passer, but he is extremely athletic. He was a 2-sport athlete at Ole Miss. Shoot, he was playing wide receiver at Ole Miss. The thing is, he is pretty hot or cold, and that loss to East Carolina, he had his worst game so far, 3 interceptions. But I think you get a big bounce back from him, and I also think you get a commitment more to the run. He only rushed for 38 yards against East Carolina. I think they'll utilize his legs. I mean, their offense is built on a quarterback who can run, and if you get stuck having to pass it all the time, you're going to be in a bind, and they got into that falling behind East Carolina, and that's where they got into a little bit of trouble. Cincinnati on the hand, love Luke Fickell, love what he's doing at that program. Love the success they had last year and early this season, but they're not the same. They're still in a little bit of a developmental year. I mean, they lost 9 guys in the NFL draft, and Ben Bryant's been a nice quarterback, but he's nowhere near to where Desmond Ridder was, and the defense isn't as dominant. They had a tight game with South Florida, who's not very good. You mentioned them letting SMU back in the game, where SMU had an onside kick away from potentially getting one more possession to win that game. So I think UCF, playing at the bounce house, has a big bounce back after that loss against East Carolina, which might have been a look-ahead game for them too, circling this one on there. So I like UCF with the point and to win the game.
All right, bounce house, bounce back for UCF in this one, and the guys are in agreement on that, and a few other games in the Big 12 as well. Lock Unity on West Virginia plus 7.5 and under 68. Well, they both like Kansas State minus 1.5 at home against Oklahoma State as well. You know, the proper term is idle, not buy. Teams that aren't playing this week are idle. Clemson is idle. The NFL does it wrong. They say buy. It's not a buy. You're idle. These teams are not, including Brady's Notre Dame Fighting Irish, dogs in the dome, against a Syracuse team coming off their first loss of the season. 4 ACC-ranked teams in action. Let's pick them with Brady Quinn and Danny Kannell, and let's start with Wake. They lose a game, you kind of forget about them. They're number 10 in the country, and they're 4-point favorites at Louisville.
This is the fishiest line of the week to me. And I have the hardest time laying these points, but I'm going to, because I don't know how Louisville can keep pace with Sam Hartman. I mean, after that close win over Liberty and obviously the overtime loss versus Clemson, Wake has been blowing out opponents. And I don't see any way really Louisville's going to be able to keep pace with Sam Hartman, who's averaging over 300 yards per air. He's second in the conference with 21 touchdown passes. It's just not Malik Cunningham's game, and they're defensively, I don't think Louisville's going to be able to stop him. And Scott Satterfield is kind of on a warm seat, at least if you read a lot of the reports out there about what may happen after the season. So all that adds up to me to say, lay the 4 points. Don't worry about it, even though it does look fishy to me, Danny.
You know what I think this is about? I think this is a lack of respect for Wake Forest. I think that's what it is. I don't know if it's fishy. I think just people don't think they're very good. And if you've watched them play, whether it was against Clemson going toe-to-toe with the game, they might have been able to win. If you look at the weapons, like A.T. Perry that we just saw with a catch there for Sam Hartman, this offense is extremely tough to stop. Past some of the programs they put up big points against. I think they see an opportunity. I think that Dave Clawson is one of the more underrated coaches in the country. I guess Louisville, you've got back-to-back wins on the road against Virginia, and they beat a pretty good Pitt team, but Pitt is not the team they were last year. I think that's maybe a misguided hope that Louisville is better than they are. I think Wake wins this one easily. So I just think this is about a disrespect for Wake and the ACC in general and saying there's no way they're a top 10 team, but I think they are.
Any thought to this being a trap game in your mind? Because they do play NC State next week, and referring to Wake, that was one of the things I was thinking is, all right, maybe they get caught looking ahead and pass to Louisville, what could be a tough road opponent, I guess, if you're preparing for that matchup versus NC State.
Yeah, the schedule really heats up. 3 ranked games coming up, including the one Brady just mentioned, Danny.
Yeah, possibly, but I don't know if Wake Forest is the type of program, especially with a guy like Dave Clawson, who's pretty detail-oriented, not very flashy, just wants to go out there and continue to win and gain people's respect on the field. I don't know if they're the place that has the look-ahead game, so I'm not that worried about this pick.
They still call that Papa John's Stadium out there?
Last time I checked, they did, but I haven't checked recently.
We're brought to you by Papa John's today, and picking Wake, I guess. Let's go to noon Eastern time. Notre Dame at Syracuse, and the Orange, they blew it against Clemson last week, and they bounced back.
Let's be real, though, too. I mean, Clemson turned the football over, 4 times, a couple fumbles, interceptions. I mean, now you may have a quarterback controversy with DJ Uiagalelei and Cade Klubnik, who helped bring Clemson back, really on the back of Will Shipley in the rushing attack there for Clemson. So not sure what to make of that performance. I think you'd say early on, at least first half, well played by Syracuse, but couldn't seem to hang on. Bottom line is, I'm looking at this saying Garrett Schrader's going to be a problem for Notre Dame's defense. The way he's able to run the football alongside of Sean Tucker, that to me is going to be maybe the Achilles heel of how this game goes. That being said, though, I do think if you look at the way Clemson was able to run the football, and other opponents for that matter, Syracuse has played somewhat of a soft schedule until Clemson. Clemson was able to get away with some big gains. That's clearly going to be Notre Dame's calling card in this one. So I'll take the 3 points at Notre Dame on the road in this one. Like I said, it's going to be razor tight either way with how this game shakes out.
I was torn on this one too. I'm going to go ahead and lay the points with Syracuse. I look at that game last week for them, and they've got to be sick to their stomachs about not getting out of there with a win. I mean, they had the win right there for the taking, and they just couldn't close the deal. But I also think that defense gained even more confidence. They're the best defense in the ACC. Those turnovers, I don't know if they were so much given away. I mean, they were stripping the ball from DJ. They did pick him off a couple times. They were creating havoc as a defense. And I think that's one of the more underrated stories of this team. And then you mix it in with a very creative offense with Garrett Schrader, able to move the ball downfield. You mentioned Sean Tucker who's running the ball. I don't know if they're able to just run the ball at will against Notre Dame, but I do think they'll have enough firepower through the air. That's why I took the under as well, because I do think Notre Dame could struggle, and I actually like the under probably better than the side in this one, but I'll go ahead and take Syracuse as a team that even in a loss, I feel like maybe their confidence was built up after that, saying, hey, we can go toe-to-toe with Clemson. Why can't we beat Notre Dame at home? So I'll say even in a loss, they're kind of filled with a little bit more confidence and belief after that one, knowing what they're capable of.
One X factor for this one for me is going to be special teams. You don't talk about a lot, especially we don't talk about a lot. Notre Dame had 2 blocked punts last week, both by Isaiah Foskey. Something to keep an eye on, I think, moving forward. Special teams units for Notre Dame have been pretty good this year. Probably one of the more stable pieces. And
we showed you the note a little bit earlier. 25 straight wins against ACC teams for Notre Dame. Pittsburgh is at North Carolina, and historically Pittsburgh has not played well in Chapel Hill. They're 0-6 all time. I don't know what that has to do with this week, but I know the fans will always go back to that just because they haven't seen it yet. And this North Carolina team has looked really good ever since they lost to Notre Dame.
They have. Drake May, to me, leads the country as far as total offense. Through the air with his legs. He's a one-man show. He's tough to stop. I think for Pitt's defense and Pat Narduzzi, that's going to be the challenge, is how do you limit a guy that can create big throws, big plays down the field, but also hurt you with his legs. They've got an offense that's wide open. They can surprise you with some up-tempo. It's just tough to stop. On the flip side, by the way, Pitt's offense has struggled. Keaton Slovis has never really found a rhythm in this system. That being said, Israel Abanikanda, he does lead the ACC in rushing, and North Carolina's defense is it's the worst in rushing. So maybe that's where this thing stays a little close. I'm going to go ahead and lay the 3.5 points, though, here with UNC. I just think it's going to be a hard time, or Pitt's going to have a hard time keeping up or keeping pace with Drake May in this offense.
I'm with you. I'm going to go ahead and lay the points with UNC. Drake May is an absolute stud. I got a bonus bet for you. Go ahead and take a flyer on him to win the Heisman Trophy at 30-1. before it gets a little tighter and you don't get as much return for your investment. I'm not predicting he's going to win, but I think it's worth the risk at that value because he's going to continue to put up these type of monster numbers in Phil Longo's offense. And their defense isn't very good, but he just keeps putting up numbers. He's second in the country with 24 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. He can create plays with his legs. You mentioned it, Brady. I talked to him last week, and he said he likes to compare himself to Josh Allen. And once you start watching the film, you can kind of see a little bit of shades of there, the improvisational skills, the ability to get outside the pocket. He's not quite as a physical specimen as Josh Allen, but I do think he means that much to this Carolina Tar Heel program. And they've got some opportunities. Again, that top 10 Wake team they have to play, that'll be an absolute shootout between those two games. If they're a one-loss ACC team and they play in the ACC championship game, I think he'll be sitting there in New York with a chance to win the award. So a little bonus bet for you. I'll take UNC, lay the 3.5, but I also like the odds you can get right now for Drake May to win the Heisman.
30-1. You like that too, Brady?
No.
They're going to have a chance.
I don't think he's got any shot at winning the Heisman.
If they win out, play Clemson in the ACC championship game and beat them, C.J. Stroud might have to lose a couple of games.
C.J. Stroud is probably going to win it, but the return is awful. I don't even like.
You got to look at Bama too, and Bryce Young. He's the defending Heisman Trophy winner. He'll have his opportunities to creep back up into that conversation. We talked about Blake Corum. Someone mentioned him earlier. I mean, he's a player you have to keep an eye on. If Michigan runs the table, they beat Ohio State, go to the Big Ten championship game, and a college football playoff, you'd have to think that it was on his back, and he'd be a part of that conversation.
One more ranked game in the ACC to go to. It's Virginia Tech at number 24, NC State. Virginia Tech's won 5 straight against the Wolfpack. Wolfpack are due for a win here.
They are due for a win here, and I believe Virginia Tech's on a 4-game skid at this point. Both teams coming off of a bye. Keyshawn King, leading rusher for Va Tech. He's been out with an injury. He could be back for this one. This one's hard to predict. It's just too big of a number for me, especially considering NC State and the injury to Devin Leary now. Jack Chambers takes over at quarterback, having a hard time generating some offense there for NC State. So this is one where at 13.5 points, it's just too big for me. So I'm on the side of Va Tech here, taking the 13.5.
I'm going to go with the Wolfpack because of the bye week. I mean, Jack Chambers thrown in the mix. It clearly was, not the same as a massive drop-off from Devin Leary, who even himself wasn't having the same type of year he had last year, where he was one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. But I think they'll be more physical. I think they'll try to establish the run game much more significantly and have some success against a Virginia Tech team that just – again, Brent Pry's doing a nice job there, but I don't think their talent level across the board is very good when it's stacked up against NC State. And NC State's defense, I think, will have some success shutting them down. So I think it'll be a lower scoring game, but I do like NC State to win by 2 touchdowns.
All right, Danny drinking the Tuffy Lager and going with NC State, the Fighting Will Brinsons. Only a couple of agreements in the ACC from the guys. They agree on Wake Forest to cover the 4 points at Louisville. And they also like UNC, North Carolina, minus 3.5 against Pittsburgh. I do want to point out, I didn't mention it, but the NC State Virginia Tech game, that's a Thursday game, Thursday night. We're picking ranked college football games against the spread, and there are 4 top 14 teams in the Pac-12. Utah plays on Thursday on the Palouse at Washington State. Utah is the slightest favorite of the 4 teams. Oregon's a 17-point favorite at Cal. USC is laying 15 at Arizona, and UCLA giving 16.5 at home against Stanford late Saturday night. Let's start with Bo Nix and the Oregon Ducks, 17-point favorites at Cal after the big win against UCLA last week.
That's right, Danny. What does that mean then for this matchup as they head to Berkeley, that sleepy, quiet place? What would you consider this, Danny? Is it a hangover game maybe?
Oh, yeah. You know it.
So that's the side I'm on here. I think I look at this. Justin Wilcox knows how to construct a defense to stop the rushing attack for Oregon. I mean, it's a big number when you think about the fact that Jack Plummer is coming off his best game this season versus Washington, even though it wasn't a loss. 245 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no picks. I think Cal will be able to do some things this game to keep it within that number. So, look, I know we talk about it all the time. This stuff is real, though. There was a lot that went into that game last week for Oregon, which was a dominant performance versus UCLA. Give them all the credit in the world, but this is one where I think this game's a little tighter than their number shows. So give me those 17 points and the Cal Bears.
This might be the ultimate of all ultimate hangover games right here. I mean, there might be more protesters gluing themselves to the turf than there are fans in the stands. I mean, Marshawn Lynch is going to be, he's out there talking about, he can't even keep it clean when he's talking about the lack of fans in the stands. They just don't care. And it is sad. It's one of the harder jobs in college football. But even in some of their losses, and it is hard to explain how they lost to a Colorado team, but they still are fighting for Justin Wilcox, their head coach. And they're still going to put together a game plan that I think could present some problems. And now that you're Oregon, they do have that bullseye on their back. They're going to get everybody's best effort. And I do think it'll be a little bit of a sluggish start, playing an atmosphere that will be completely opposite of what you saw last weekend against Outson. So I think it'll be a slow start. Oregon does need style points, especially if they have any thought of erasing the memory of that 49-3 loss to the Georgia Bulldogs. But I don't think they get them here. And I think all they need is a win here. But I think it'll be closer to 2 touchdowns. So I'll take those 17.5.
Isn't that funny? That's a typical Pac-12. Like they'll have a big win like that, and someone ends up flopping
right
the following week.
Yeah, you just never know.
Jaden out running the football has been probably the best freshman running back in the Pac-12 too. I mean, Cal can do some things in this game if they catch Oregon sleeping.
If they do, those protesters are going to storm the field twice in that game. USC right. minus 15 at Arizona. Oh, those folks down there love it when USC comes to town. Trojans had to sit out an extra week after that heartbreaker.
Yeah,
at Utah.
Did. And the way these two teams square up, it's kind of interesting. Michael Wiley probably could be back for Arizona. He's their leading rusher. He was out with an oblique injury the previous game. And Jordan Addison, something to keep an eye on moving forward. He left USC's last game with a lower body injury. Whether or not he plays in this one is a big if. And it's a big if in part, even though they have depth at wide receiver at USC, and they should be able to take advantage of an Arizona pass defense that struggled at times this year. He's still a game breaker. He's still a difference maker. This game's on the road, and Jaden Deloria has been one of the more prolific passers in the Pac-12. So this is another one where I look at the number at 15. It's just a little bit bloated, a little inflated. Jed Fish has this Arizona Wildcats team playing better than most people think. So I'm going to go ahead and take the 15 points here in Arizona, Danny. What say you?
I'm with you. The Pac-12 too. I need to see it from USC to be that dominant team that everyone wants them to be. The offense has been good. I don't think they've been great. They're coming off a devastating loss, which I would not want to bye a week after that one. I would get right back after the field. They've been out. They've just had to sit around and think about it. Maybe take them a little bit of time to get back up to speed. So I'm going to go ahead and take Arizona here. The number at 75 is crazy. And I know Arizona is one of the worst defenses in the Pac-12, but this is just a huge number. I think on principle alone, if I see a 75 out there, you almost have to take the under and say, prove it to me that there's going to be this shootout. So I'll go ahead and take Arizona and the under as well. A little lock unity.
A little lock unity there.
Hey, you guys have a bunch of lock unities this week. We'll recap them all in just a minute, but let's move on to Stanford at UCLA. The Bruins coming off their first loss of the season at Oregon.
Yeah, and the way I was going to say these two teams square up, Stanford's kind of played some teams competitively. They've gotten a little more on a better roll. It's been more the defense than anything else. But to me, UCLA is just going to be too much. DTR, Zach Charbonnet, the combination of those two in the backfield, I think they still realize they've got a shot right now in the Pac-12. They're not out of it yet. They lose one more, they would be in this case. But this is a big number, and it's one in which you kind of worry about the way David Shaw and Stanford could sometimes play and hang around in football games. I don't in this one. I think UCLA gets back on track at home at the Rose Bowl, another place that they're kind of hurting for some fans in the stands, but one in which I don't think there'll be many Stanford fans there. So bottom line is lay the 16.5 points here.
I'm with you on this one. I think this is an opportunity for UCLA to kind of get that taste out of their mouth. Like we were just talking about USC and a tough loss to Utah having to sit out a bye week. UCLA gets to get right back to work and really erase that game. And it wasn't I know it lost and it never felt like UCLA was in the game, but the red zone and the decision to have to kick field goals was the difference. They put up big numbers, and I think they'll continue to put up big numbers against Stanford. And I don't think Stanford can match the offensive firepower and the physicality with which UCLA can run the football. So I'll take UCLA in a big bounce-back game because they very much are still playing for something. That's Pac-12 championship. All
right, the Utah Utes are playing on Thursday night after their bye week, after beating USC. They're at Washington State. The spread is 8.
Yeah, and to me, it's a spread that, the way I look at it, Utah is very much in the thick of things. And, regardless of how the season started off for them, losing to Florida and Gainesville, there's still very much a chance that they're going to win the Pac-12 championship if they can win out and find themselves in the thick of things. Cam Rising's probably one of the better stories in college football this year. I don't know that we've given him enough credit. You go back to the USC game, just an unbelievable gutsy performance with him kind of putting the team almost on his back. 415 yards pass, a couple touchdowns, add 60 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. He's going to be key in this one as well. Dalton Kincaid's taken over too for Brant Keithy, who's been out due to injury. He's really stepped up at the tight end position. I just think it's going to be too much. Cam Ward's starting to slow down. This Washington State offense has slowed down a bit. And even though Washington State's been pretty stout against the run, this is an opportunity for Tavion Thomas to get back on track. It's been a little bit quiet this year compared to last year. So I'm going to lay the 8 points here in Utah. I think they need to build some momentum now as they try to head into what could be a Pac-12 title run.
I'm with you. In the Pac-12, I feel like there's these top 4 teams which have clearly separated themselves. And unfortunately, I think they're all going to knock each other out of a playoff race, and they're going to be fighting for that position to see the 1-2, the teams that are left remaining at the top. You got Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Utah, even though with 2 losses, they're still up there and very much in the hunt. I think they'll go on the road exactly like you talked about. Cam Rising, you got the leadership. Remember Kyle Whittingham, what he said at the end of that game against USC. He's like, I want to put the ball in his hands. They have an unquestioned leader who's going to protect the football, who won't let this team overlook any opponent. I think they'll go out there and they'll get the road win and win it by more than the 8.
They play each other November the 19th. All 4 of these teams will have head-to-head meetings with each other November the 19th. UCLA plays USC, Oregon plays Utah. But before then, these teams can continue their winning ways, though you guys are going with a couple of underdogs to cover. Cal to cover the 17 at home against Oregon. Arizona plus 15 against USC. Look at all these lock unity.
The 3 lock unities in the Pac-12.
Oh boy! Gracious. The only non-lock unity.
We're
you
in
still
trouble.
agree on UCLA minus 16.5, but Utah minus 8 is the pick as well against Washington State. You got your winning ingredients right here, delivered by Papa John's. Best bets for Week 9 in college football. Danny, I'm going to let you go first because you're going off the grid here, a non-top 25 game. What do you like?
I like going off the grid. Last week, I found Liberty, got the big win against BYU outright. I'm going to the Big 12. We talked about all the even matchups that are out there. Oklahoma lost 3 games in a row. There was panic out there. They got their quarterback back, though, and they were able to get off the schneid with a win against Kansas. Now they play against Iowa State, who does have a really good defense, but I think Dylan Gabriel being back for the Oklahoma Sooners is going to make a massive difference in this one, and I don't know if Iowa State's offense will have that much success against Oklahoma's defense in order to win the game. You only have to lay 1.5, so I'll go ahead and take the Oklahoma Sooners to lay them here on the road and get back on track and kind of back to their winning ways.
That one scares me. I'm not sure what to expect out of that one, but yeah, Xavier Hutchinson's been one of the best receivers maybe in the country this year. Put up a lot of production. That's a secondary for Oklahoma that's had its weak points. So I am staying away from that one. I am going to talk about a game we talked about earlier in today's show. Illinois, Nebraska. I like the under of 50.5. Look, this is one of the better defenses in the Big Ten in Illinois. They're going to run the football. You know that's going to help shorten the game. I do think Nebraska, again, will keep this thing close, but I do think they're going to struggle at times to find points. So take the under of Nebraska and Illinois.
Okay, and you both said bonus pick. Take the under 31.5 in the Iowa Northwestern record-setting total.
I mean, unless Iowa's defense keeps scoring points like we saw in Columbus.
Well, they'll
Do we have
probably be the only
Hassel?
unit that
Do we have a
scores
lock?
points.
Do we have a lock Trinity on that one? You all?
Yes, I will. And by the way, Kirk Ferentz says he doesn't know if he's starting Petrus or Padilla. Not that it really matters in that game. Those are your best bets. We had a bunch of lock unities as well. 6 of them. 6 lock unities. Utah and the over. Arizona and the under. Cal and the under. Wake and the over. West Virginia and the under. Michigan and the over. That's 6 lock unities out of the 18 games that we picked this week. And there were agreements on, I think, close to 75% of the games. So,
That can't be good.
So, well, if you guys hit, you hit big.
That's true.
And you hit together.
We'll be celebrating together.
That's right.
Celebrate with some Tuffy beer.
But we won't have a hangover week next week.
That's
No,
right.
no, not here on HQ. Clemson and Alabama are off. Those are the 2 top 10 teams that are idle this week. For Brady Quinn and Danny Kannell, I'm Chris Hassel. Thanks for watching College Football Picks.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.